Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories they're covering this week and where the headlines are going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with senior political correspondent David Drucker. And David, this past week in the primaries, both of Trump's big endorsed candidates in Georgia lost by pretty significant margins, and in Alabama, a candidate that Trump unendorsed made it to a runoff. What does that say about the limits of Trump's influence?
Well, it says that there are limits. It was a really interesting night because Brian Kemp, incumbent Republican governor in Georgia, that Trump blames for the fact that he lost Georgia to Joe Biden, claims the election was stolen. There's no evidence for this, but he blames Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger for allowing this to happen, for aiding and abetting this theft. And Republican voters just said, never mind, we like you. And Republican voters in Georgia still like Trump a lot, but they didn't really believe what he had to say about the election being stolen, not enough of them anyway. And they thought that Brian Kemp was doing a very good job. So even though Trump was able to recruit a top flight candidate into the race against Kemp in the Republican primary, former Senator David Perdue, at last count, Kemp was beating Perdue by more than 50 percentage points. I mean, it was a whacking of epic proportions. Brad Raffensperger only got 52% of the vote, but he beat Representative Jody Hice, who Trump recruited into the race to challenge him for Secretary of State, by a good 20, 30 points, and he avoided a runoff. And, you know, Kemp always had a chance. He's the incumbent governor. He always was in a good place with conservatives. Raffensperger was dead man walking, and he still survived. By the way, there were a slate of Trump candidates that lost in Georgia on Tuesday. It wasn't just the two races we were following, a candidate for attorney general, a candidate for insurance commissioner. I mean, Trump's endorsements just got pretty much demolished across the board, at least the ones that mattered. And, you know, when we were in college, right, sometimes we'd have professors, they'd give us quizzes, but really, even if you aced the quizzes, your whole grade rested on the midterm and the final. That was like 75% of your grade. So Trump's endorsement record is stellar. It's going to continue to be stellar. But this is like a weighted exam here, and at least this past Tuesday, he failed miserably. It doesn't mean that he's not the overwhelming favorite for the Republican nomination if he runs for president in 2024. He would still begin that way. His relationship with Republican voters is still good. But he can't get voters to do just anything. And a lot of voters, and I think we learned this in Georgia, don't want to relitigate 2020. Even if they think something funny happened, even if they actually believe Trump, even if they just felt unsure about the process in 2020, given all the rules changes with mail-in ballots and all of that, they want to focus on 2022, on all of the issues like inflation and the economy and rising crime and all of that. And candidates that do that, if you're endorsed by Trump, the Trump endorsement is going to help you that much more. But it's not going to save you from looking backwards. Good point to bring up Mo Brooks in Alabama. Trump famously pulled that endorsement. We had interviewed Trump, the Examiner, and asked him, what do you think of Mo Brooks? Not very happy, Trump says, might pull the endorsement. Well, he pulls the endorsement, and Mo Brooks is dead man walking, and all of a sudden he's in a runoff, which means he has a chance. This runoff in Alabama will happen on June 21st. Katie Britt is still the favorite in that race. Katie Britt may get Trump's endorsement. He hasn't ruled out endorsing again. I don't know that he would go back to Brooks. Especially the war of words they had after Trump pulled the endorsement. But again, it shows you that Trump's endorsement isn't the end-all, be-all. And I think what this means is that for prominent Republican elected officials who sometimes have issues with Trump, but have often been afraid to speak up, I think when they look at Trump's candidates getting whacked in primaries, and again, some of his candidates will win and have won, J.D. Vance in Ohio, et cetera, but I think what this means is there are a lot of Republicans in elected office that will say, you know, if I disagree with Trump on something, I'm a little less afraid to go up against him, because as long as I say, hey, I like Trump, I just disagree with him, and make a strong case, voters may respect that. And I think that's why these endorsements are so important. That, and some Republicans may be more willing to run against him in 2024 if he runs again a third time, whereas before they might have thought he was just completely unassailable.
Switching gears a little bit, after this tragic school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, gun control is sort of back on the agenda in Congress. Do you think politically that's going to gain any traction?
So we have seen horrific mass shootings in schools and businesses for several years now. The shooting targeting black Americans at a Buffalo, New York supermarket, and then, barely a week later, this horrific shooting at an elementary school where these kids were targeted and teachers lost their lives. But it has failed over the years to generate any action in Congress. The two parties are on opposite sides of this, where Republicans are very much in favor of doing almost nothing to undermine the Second Amendment, which guarantees Americans' right to keep and bear arms, and Democrats feeling that the only way you're really going to attack this epidemic of mass shootings and keep people safe is to diminish some of those rights, make it harder for law-abiding citizens to purchase guns. I think both parties, both politicians on both sides, are very heartfelt. They really believe in their position. Republicans don't believe that by undermining a law-abiding citizen's right to purchase guns that it's going to stop these mass shootings. Democrats don't believe you can do it any other way. So how do they meet in the middle? It's a very difficult thing to do, particularly in our politics. There are discussions now going on in the United States Senate between Democrats and Republicans looking for ways to get to 60 votes and overcome a filibuster on some sort of bill. Maybe it's possible this time, but I don't know if they're going to be able to bridge the gap, because ultimately the concern on the Republican side for preserving gun rights and the concern on the Democratic side for doing the only thing they feel will work to prevent these shootings, which is to reduce gun rights or implement some sort of gun safety or gun control legislation, is just, the gap between the two might just be too much. But I don't think we can say today that nothing will happen, because they've only begun talking in recent days. And even Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, held off temporarily on calling votes on gun control legislation that was already available, because he wanted to give the parties some time to negotiate.
Well, David, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more reporting from David and the rest of the political team at washingtonexaminer.com.